Hello and welcome back to the Neumann Update. I'm Lexi Lomax. What started as a popular trend has caused hundreds of teenagers and young adults to be hospitalized, suffering from critical and life-threatening illnesses. The term vaping comes from the use of electronic cigarettes, e-vaporizers, and Juuls, all of which are devices that allow people to inhale aerosol, typically containing nicotine, flavoring, and various chemicals. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention states that there are over 380 cases of lung illnesses associated with the use of e-cigarette products. Unfortunately, on September 11th, an update was made on the CDC's website that a sixth death has been confirmed due to the use of e-cigarettes this week. We sat down with Aston Township resident Jerry Sullivan, whose son became severely ill and was hospitalized from his juuling habit.
As the day went on, that chest pain got increasingly more and more intense. He kept telling me he felt like he was only breathing with one lung. He said, "I can't breathe." And I could see he was like sweating, and it was an effort to move. Like he had like no muscle control. Getting up from a chair to a standing position, it took a lot of strength to do that. And he was exhausted. And I was like, okay, well, we're going right to DuPont because we're not going back to Riddle. They told us about a pediatric hospital. So we got in the car, went to DuPont. And by the time we got to DuPont, he was just like a mess, I could tell. The whole way down there, he was having difficulty breathing. So walking through the parking lot, he was, like, "Mom, I don't even know if I can make it there." We get into the ER, told them that he was having trouble breathing. They brought us right back. And the first thing they did is they put that little pulse oximeter or pulse ox thing, on your finger. And I heard the nurse say, "Eddie, put the pulse ox on your finger." And he goes, "It is on my finger." And all of a sudden there was just a look between the two nurses of like panic. And I was like, what's going on here? And then they said, "Get somebody else." And they're like, "Mrs. Sullivan, don't panic, but we're going to put him in a wheelchair. We're going to take him to a larger room where more people can look at him." And before I even knew it, they kind of like whisked us into this like large trauma room. They had him in there first, and by the time I went walking in, there were like 8 people surrounding his bed. He already had an IV in. They were taking blood to do blood work. They were doing a chest X-ray right in the room. And I remember looking around thinking like, how the hell did we get to this place? And what's going on here? I literally was still like holding my car keys. Like we didn't even sit down when we went into the ER. It was that quick. So one nurse came and approached me right away and said, like, "You're not going home. He's being admitted." They had oxygen on him immediately right away. And they knew from the pulse ox number, because it was so low, that he was not getting enough oxygen.
After testing was done, medical professionals first thought that this was a strange case of pneumonia. Jerry then found out that this was the result of using electronic cigarettes.
So it wasn't until maybe like the first 24 hours where the doctors came to me and said, "Your son, told us that he uses his Juul all the time. We really do think that all this is related to vaping."
After days of making little progress at the hospital, doctors were trying their best not to place Eddie in a medically induced coma.
So every morning when the doctors made their rounds, I was encouraged to go out to be a part of that. And the parent gets to hear what they talk about, their medical jargon, and ask questions. And so I was there Wednesday, was there Thursday. By Friday morning, the team of doctors that were making their rounds, they thought like, he's not really making any progress, and we think the next step is probably going to be putting him on a ventilator. He would have been in a medically induced coma. And I pretty much lost it. This is my only kid. I lost my husband when my son was 1. He is my whole world. So as a mom listening to this, I lost it, and I begged and pleaded like, you have to do whatever you can. You can't do this to my son. You can't. I understand you want to help him, but there has to be something. And I knew that they had mentioned about the pulmonology team coming to see him. So I said, "Pulmonology never came yet. Can we have pulmonology come?" And I kind of pushed, for that a little bit. So soon after they made their rounds, pulmonology came to visit, and the doctor asked me a set of questions. I asked my son a set of questions. And he said, "We're going to start him on a steroid and a hardcore antibiotic, different than the one he's been on. Let's see if that makes a difference." And within a few hours, I remember saying to his nurse, "Is it me, or does he seem like he's perked up a little bit?" And that really was the beginning of his road back, was being on that.
Medical professionals expect Eddie to experience these symptoms until October. However, these symptoms will play a role in the rest of his life.
He inquired with the doctors in the hospital about secondhand smoke because so many of his friends do it. And the doctor, who didn't sugarcoat anything, pretty much said, you can't be around it. He basically said, if you inhale anything ever again, no matter what it is, you will die. And Eddie's question was, will I just drop dead? And the doctor explained, no, your lungs will get sicker and sicker each time till eventually they'll just stop working.
With the severity of Eddie's case, Jerry wanted to tell his story to prevent future cases.
I remember telling my son when all of this was over and we came home, I said, listen, I will be the most outspoken person against vaping because of this, but I don't want to embarrass you. So I would like to write about this, but only when you give me like the okay. So initially he was not comfortable with me doing that. After he started hearing news reports about people around the nation becoming sick from this, and that local boy from Broomall who is in the hospital on in a medically induced coma, he looked at me and he said, I think you better share my story with people. I think people need to know. And his exact words were, I don't want any of my friends to have to go through what I went through. So I said, would you like me to post it on Facebook? And he said, you can post it to your friends. So I just sat down and started typing the story word for word. And I thought, I'll post it on my page. I have a lot of friends. They'll read it. And then I thought, I want them to share it. And I really don't make posts public that often, but I did decide to make this one public. And I encourage people to share it and get the word out there that this needs to stop, especially in our kids and our adolescents. And I had no clue. I thought maybe 40, 50 shares. I had no idea that this was going to be shared as many times as it's been shared.
Since Jerry has shared Eddie's story on Facebook, the story has taken a life of its own. With Juul controlling about 70% of the e-cigarette market within the U.S., several states are taking the initiative to fight back against the company. A group of Delaware lawmakers are considering banning flavored e-cigarette sales within the state. State Representative Deborah Hefferman said, our goal with this proposal is to break that cycle. On Wednesday evening, the Trump administration stated that they are preparing to ban flavored e-cigarettes to reverse the deeply concerning epidemic of the youth e-cigarette use that is impacting children, families, schools, and communities. Recently, the Food and Drug Administration agency issued a letter to Juul Labs stating that the company had violated several regulations for advertising its product as safer alternative to smoking. The FDA warned the company that if they did not comply with laws governing vaping devices, it could impose civil penalties or ultimately seize its products. E-cigarette companies, including Juul, have 10 months or until May 2020 to submit their application with appropriate evidence that their product is a safer alternative. Dr. Ned Sharpless, an acting FDA commissioner, said that the law is clear that before marketing tobacco products for reduced risk, companies should demonstrate with scientific evidence that their specific product does in fact pose less risk or is less harmful. Research is still in the early stages when looking at the long-term effects of e-cigarettes. Many agree that it's time for an end in this vaping epidemic. Be sure to tune in next week as we sit down with members of the Neumann community to talk about how its problems are affecting our campus.